Right now, the macroeconomic architecture of importing nations is facing a severe stress test, an inelastic energy supply shock. The origin point is the Strait of Hormuz. This single maritime corridor handles 20 million barrels of oil per day, representing 33% of all global energy trade. When traffic slows here, the mathematical impact is immediate. This chart tracks the immediate global market reaction. Within a single 30-day window, the price of Brent crude surged 60%. Central banks operate at a strict disadvantage in this environment. An energy supply constraint is a classic exogenous shock, an external physical event that entirely bypasses domestic monetary controls like interest rates. Global geopolitical friction bypasses policy theory and immediately translates into unavoidable mathematical pressure on any nation dependent on foreign energy. For India, the structural weakness is clear. The country relies on imported fossil fuels to meet over 85% of its industrial energy demand. This diagram illustrates the penalty of that reliance. For every $10 increase in a barrel of crude, the extra spending widens India's current account deficit, how much more a country imports than exports, by 0.3 to 0.4% of GDP. To pay this rapidly inflating import bill, domestic importers must sell domestic rupees to aggressively buy more US dollars on the open market. The sheer volume of this unbalanced demand strips the rupee of its value. As importers flood the market with domestic currency, the exchange rate slides past the severe 93 rupees to $1 US threshold. This creates a direct feedback loop. A weaker currency means everything priced in dollars becomes more expensive to bring across the border, creating imported inflation across domestic sectors reliant on global supply chains, from raw fertilizers to consumer electronics. The exogenous energy shock has successfully breached the border, mutating from a distant geopolitical event into a systemic domestic currency crisis. This rapid depreciation triggers an immediate behavioral reaction from foreign portfolio investors, or FPIs. These are entities holding financial assets in another country, and they are now watching the value of their Indian holdings erode along with the rupee. To protect their capital, these investors execute a rapid exit strategy. They begin aggressively liquidating their domestic assets in the Indian equity and debt markets to avoid further currency exposure. The fleeing capital requires a destination. Investors rotate their wealth into safe haven assets, specifically US government bonds, a move that further strengthens the US dollar globally and compounds the initial problem. As foreign investors dump Indian sovereign debt en masse, the fundamental trading price of those domestic government bonds collapses under the selling pressure. This diagram visualizes the inverse relationship between a bond's price and its yield. Because the price of the bonds plummets, the yield, the effective interest rate the government must pay to attract buyers, spikes to a punishing 6.8%. This external capital flight directly increases the baseline cost of borrowing for the entire domestic economy. Government debt sets the floor for corporate interest rates, meaning corporate expansion and overall economic growth now face severe headwinds. Arresting this currency slide before it triggers a broader macroeconomic failure requires direct institutional intervention from the Reserve Bank of India. The central bank deploys its primary blunt force tool, a foreign exchange reserve buffer of roughly $700 billion, used to conduct dollar-rupee swap auctions. This balance sheet diagram shows the exact mechanical flow. The RBI enters the open market to aggressively sell its reserve dollars, ensuring supply meets the high demand. Simultaneously, it buys up the depreciating rupees, physically removing them from circulation to increase their scarcity and value. The RBI deliberately locks these transactions into long-term derivatives with maturities of 1 year or more. Derivatives are financial contracts that derive their value from an underlying asset, in this case, currency. By executing long-term swaps, the RBI signals to the market that it anticipates a prolonged structural disruption. While this massive market intervention successfully defends the exchange rate, it inadvertently introduces a dangerous new variable into the domestic banking system. By purchasing massive quantities of rupees during the swap auctions, the central bank physically removes that cash from the M3 money supply. M3 is the broad economic measure that includes all currency in circulation and commercial bank deposits. This sudden absorption of cash triggered a historical anomaly, India's very first severe banking liquidity deficit since 2016. A liquidity deficit is a systemic threat. Without immediate access to operating capital, commercial banks cannot originate loans, which chokes domestic credit creation and halts corporate operations. To fix the problem it just created, the RBI initiates its mandatory secondary corrective mechanism, open market operations, or OMOs. OMOs are the primary way a central bank adjusts the money supply by buying or selling government bonds. This two-valve diagram illustrates the mechanics. While Valve 1 drains rupees to defend the currency, the central bank opens Valve 2. It uses OMOs to purchase government securities directly from the open market, forcibly injecting fresh rupee liquidity back into the commercial banking system. OMOs provide an elegant secondary benefit. By forcibly injecting cash to buy bonds, the RBI creates massive institutional demand for government debt. This purchasing pressure directly suppresses the spiking yields that were threatening to raise borrowing costs across the economy. The central bank is effectively trapped in a complex policy trilemma. It must constantly calibrate its market interventions to balance currency defense, banking liquidity, and sovereign bond yields, all at the exact same time. The immediate mechanics of the trilemma demonstrate how the central bank stabilizes the system. However, the long-term strategic viability of relying on these interventions is mathematically constrained. The $700 billion forex reserve is a formidable shock absorber, but it is a finite resource. It is currently being deployed against a global geopolitical conflict that is potentially indefinite. We have seen the limits of this protocol during major historical shocks, notably the 2008 global financial crisis and the capital flight triggered by the 2013 Fed taper tantrum. In each case, reserves burned quickly. Relying entirely on forex depletion and OMO cash injections is merely firefighting. It manages the symptoms of the crisis without addressing the underlying disease. Tactical monetary policy cannot permanently offset a structural infrastructure deficit. Eventually, the central bank's intervention reaches its mathematical expiration date. The systemic solution ultimately requires structural fireproofing. The economy must permanently eradicate its 85% dependency on imported fossil fuels to neutralize the exogenous shock entirely. This shift requires a deliberate capital allocation. The priority sector lending framework must be shifted directly toward funding domestic renewable infrastructure, scaling capacity to create genuine energy independence. Intermittent renewables must be paired with high-density, uninterrupted baseload power, the minimum continuous electrical output required to run industrial grids. This points directly to scaling indigenous nuclear generation using domestic thorium reserves. The central bank facilitates this transition. It designs transparent, regulated frameworks for institutional green deposits and sovereign green bonds, debt exclusively for environmental infrastructure. The objective of these specific frameworks is to provide concessional, low-cost capital directly to energy transition projects, allowing them to bypass the elevated borrowing costs of the broader market. True macroeconomic stability relies on the physical infrastructure of the nation. It will only be achieved when India transitions from defending its currency with finite dollars to powering its industry with indigenous electrons.